Good morning.
Good morning.
Once again, it is a pleasure and it is an honor to be able to look out and see each of you as we have these opportunities that God has blessed us with so greatly. To be able to worship Him, to be able to sing such wonderful songs in which Paul just led us in. It tied in great with our Bible class lesson, that last song there. He is our all in all, right? He takes care of us if we look towards Him and make Him of whom we put our full trust in. This morning we're going to continue that which is the theme of Sunday mornings here this year on the fundamentals or the foundational building blocks of doctrine that are necessary and are needed for all of us to take those things and then build upon them, that we may grow into salvation all the more into the mature, meaty aspects of God's Word. And of course, this is the thrust or theme verse of which we have been looking at there in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2, where he says, like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. As we think of this and as we look at that, of course, we've examined a number of those foundational matters, a number of those foundational doctrines that we can take from that, whether being reminded of it or learning it for the first time. Take those things and build upon them. And today's no different, as we're going to be looking at and studying the family tree, if you will, or the shoot-offs of parents, and that is children. We're going to be looking at what exactly does it mean to be a biblical child. Now, as all of us know, all of us are children of someone. And so, as we'll look at a passage at the end of the lesson, there is no end to that reality. Now, it might be the case that our parents have passed on, but when we look at the things in which we're going to examine, we are to not only as children make sure we are biblical children no matter our age, but we are also to make sure we're helping children see the necessity of what God deems as necessary and right. And one of the more important New Testament passages wherein this is detailed is there in Ephesians chapter 6, which we'll look at in just a moment, but it stems from what God stated in the Ten Commandments. One of them, Exodus 20 and verse 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. As I said in Ephesians, Paul explains or talks about that a little bit more and says this in Ephesians chapter 6, 1 through 3, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Now, one of the key words in this, obviously, is the word honor. It's found in both what we see there in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 12 and what we find here in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 2. Here in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 2, the word honor here means to fix a value on something. To, in other words, consider it a prized possession. So in other words, here in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2, Paul says, listen, you children need to put a high value on your parents, that they are a prized possession to you. In Exodus chapter 20 and verse 12, that word for honor there, in the Hebrew, means something slightly different, though the same basic idea. It literally means to be heavy. And the idea from this is, the implication from this, if you will, is that what is being honored ought to be considered so important and so impressive that it is of great weight or value to you. This, of course, is illustrated in 1 Samuel 9 and verse 6, where God told the Israelites, listen, the man of God ought to be honored or have great weight, great value in your sight. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and look at our first point. If you have your handout, let's examine that first point. Parents are to be honored. As Paul clearly describes, and as Moses clearly wrote down from God, parents are to be honored. They are to be that which is valued, that which is important to us. So how or what does it mean to honor them? How do we go about honoring our parents according to God's Word? What is it as children that must be taught and must be done to bring honor to our parents? Well, in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 2, where we see Paul re-legislate, if you will, the expectations of children honoring their fathers and mothers. Again, remember what was said right before that. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now, in a parallel passage from Ephesians found there in Colossians, Paul would write it this way: children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. One of the most important steps to honoring one's parents, one's father and one's mother, is to obey what they say. To take what is said and to do what they ask. Now, as Paul mentioned in the book of Ephesians, that must be in the Lord. We shouldn't be taking those things that are sinful, and we'll get more into that a little later. But as long as what they are saying is not something that's not biblical, and that will not defile our conscience in so doing from an unbiblical situation, as children, we must obey. Notice it doesn't say, children, when you are little, obey. It says, children, obey. Honor your father and mother. Not when you're living with them only, but honor your father and your mother. So the first thing that we must focus on as children is that of obeying our parents. It's vitally important. God created the family and created the expectation of this. We cannot please God without doing this, without obeying our parents in the Lord. What else is necessary to honor our parents? Honoring our parents means listening to their teaching and training in the Lord. As they teach and as they train, again, this should never end as long as there's a parent and child there. As long as they are teaching and as long as they are training, children ought to be listening and learning and applying. In the great book of Proverbs, Solomon reminded his son of this right there in the very first chapter when he said this in Proverbs 1, 8 and 9, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland on your head and pendants for your neck." Now, obviously, God thought and realized and inspired Solomon to write such words. That children ought to listen to their father's instruction and not forsake or do what their mother teaches. In other words, parents, as they teach and as they train, we honor them by listening and obeying. This is true not only when they're doing so for the reasons of building us up, but for discipline. Again, as we look at Proverbs 15 and verse 5, a fool despises his father's instruction, But whoever heeds reproof is prudent. There's never a time where training and instruction in the Lord is invalid, is not good. There's never a time, no matter how old we are, where our parents help us, teach us, and train us in the areas of righteousness, in the areas of growing up as we should, that we should not heed their advice. Now, whether that means they're critiquing or getting on to us, disciplining us, or encouraging us, it's all the same. We honor our parents as children. Every time we listen to their teaching and obey their training. Honoring our parents also means being grateful for what they have done for us. If you've heard me say it once, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. Every day my parents get smarter, more merciful and more graceful the more I think and the more I grow and the more I learn what it means to be a parent. The older I get and more I learn what it means to be righteous and true, the more I realize and the more grateful I am for my parents. Whether it be the way they raised me or disciplined me, whether it be the way they instruct me still today and help me in situations, whatever the case may be, as children, we ought to be thankful. We ought to be grateful for the sacrifices our parents have made. It's a sad state when you see a child who does not respect and honor their parents, who do not respect and honor and are ungrateful for the work that is done. That isn't to suggest that parents are perfect, as we all know we're not. Some are better than others. But we must always recognize the good that is done and the hard work that went into the training and teaching, and be reminded of how thankful we are for the time they spent in raising us and helping us. Again, the proverb writer Agur unfortunately recognized this. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. Have you ever been to the store or been out and about and you've seen that take place? Whether it be young or old. I've unfortunately seen both. A child who does not heed the advice or the discipline that's been given and throws it back in them, isn't grateful for what they have and what has been done. To honor our parents means to be grateful for the sacrifices made. Be grateful for the work that was put in. Another avenue of honoring our parents and how we honor them is that this means we don't mock or scorn them. It's never okay to put down, mock, or scorn our parents. Children have a responsibility to fear the Lord. Every one of you, Leviticus 19:3 says, every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. We all have a responsibility to fear God and to revere our mother and father. To understand that not putting our parents and recognizing them for who they are and not placing them where they ought to be by mocking them and scorning them or making fun of them, things of this nature, that's not okay ever. It's not a thing that God is okay with. No matter what our home life is like, God never says, listen, you treat them horribly. You make fun of them and you despise them. Revering our parents is done by not treating them this way, but showing respect. Again, Proverbs 30:17, the eye that mocks a father and scorns to obey a mother will be picked out by the ravens of the valley and eaten by the vultures. Now, obviously, again, this is obeying the mother is in the Lord. That's always the caveat with this. But notice that the eye that mocks the father, the one who rolls his eyes and does not respect, does not revere a father and the mother, the parents. This is not okay with God. Revering our parents is also done by not cursing them. Again, when we look at Proverbs 20 and verse 20, if one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness. And in Exodus 21 verse 17, whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. That word curse there doesn't mean to cuss at them, or isn't limited to that. To use foul language at them, though obviously that would be wrong. It holds the entirety of respect and honor. To whoever does not show their parents respect and honor, does not treat them and hold them in the position they ought to be held in, then they are in essence cursing them. Lastly, how do we honor our parents? Well, we honor our parents by taking care of them, especially in their later days of life, but where we have those opportunities. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 4 it says this, but if a widow has children, talking about the widows that need support from the church, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. If we go a few verses down into verse 8, it says this, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. As children, we have a responsibility when the time arises. Obviously, younger children living at home don't necessarily or shouldn't necessarily have this happen to them, but there's going to be that time where parents need their children's help. Where parents are going to need their children who they've taken care of, who we should be grateful to, who need that help. And to honor our parents is to do so. You know, I've oftentimes joked around with Braden and Ashlyn, though it's true. I said, listen, I'm trying to raise you right so that when it's time for you to take care of me, hopefully you'll do a good job. I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing here and getting you where you need to be, so when we come to that point, I will know I'm taken care of. And I'm sure each of us, or many of us, have had these conversations with our parents if they've gotten older. Listen, we're here. If you need to move in or you need to be taken care of, we're here. It's not easy. It's a challenge. But we have that responsibility. To do so is to deny the faith and be worse than an unbeliever. To honor parents means to respect them. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they do. As I said, parents make mistakes. They're humans. They're going to sin. Some worse than others. But it does mean we need to recognize and remember how God sees things. And at no point has God ever said, children, be disrespectful and do not honor your parents. No. On the opposite side, he says, make sure we honor our fathers and our mothers. There is a great expectation of children from God. He doesn't put an age limit on this. Now, obviously, maturity plays a role. We don't expect an infant to do the same thing as a high schooler, but God doesn't say, children of a certain age, this is when you honor your parents. No, he says, children, honor them. And from these passages we have read, we find another implication that must be discussed then from God, and that is parents have expectations on them. Not only does God say, listen, you children, you need to honor and respect and revere and recognize who your parents are. You need to take care of them and you need to obey them and you need to do all of these things. But there's an expectation and an implication directly tied to that, and that is parents better be doing what they're supposed to be doing. They better be training their children properly. As parents, we better make sure, because we will be judged if we are not training and instructing our children in the way they ought to go. In Ephesians chapter 6, we looked at 1 through 3. It then ends there in verse 4 with this: Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Bring them up in the training needed and the teaching required of the Lord. Good parents are those who make it so that it's easy for their children to honor them. That it's easy for them to revere and respect and treat them the way they should. Now, are there outliers in every situation? Sure. Even as Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We know it's a proverb. It's the 99.9% rule, and there's a chance that it won't work. But the value of parents' training and teaching is found in this. The value of what Moses wrote and God told him to say in Deuteronomy 11, 19 through 21 is the exception, is the rule, not the exception. You shall teach them to your children, talking about the Word of God. Talking of them when you are sitting in the house and when you are walking by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land of the Lord swore to you by to your fathers to give them as long as the heavens and are above the earth. God said, listen, if you want to know how to be a good parent, that almost every aspect of life is training and teaching your children about God. Because that is the best opportunity they're going to have to not depart from it. And even if they do, they'll have all that they need to know to come back. As parents, we have a responsibility to make sure that we give our children every reason to show us honor, to give us respect, to place us in the value that we ought to have. If a child is to respect his parents, that respect must be expected of the parent. In other words, parents ought to make sure that we are training our children in this. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 15, it says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Children aren't born understanding righteousness. Children aren't born understanding giving to others and all those kinds of things. They are taught, they are trained. Again, Proverbs chapter 13, 24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. It's not that God is saying, listen, parents, you need to be beating your kids. What he's saying is discipline. When it takes the rod from time to time, that children are foolish. A child cannot respect a parent that does not instill respect for their authority. Thankfully, though, when a child is taught this, when foolishness is removed, when they learn respect for authority, especially their parents, it will find its way to God. Again, the child's third word, usually after mom, and sometimes his second word, or daddy, dada, is mine. We've all seen it. We all know it. God says there's foolishness there. Not that they were created wrong, but that they must be trained. Parents have expectations of God that we teach them and start the reality of learning there is a beginning, or start this reality that a beginning of a greater perspective is needed. It's not all about me, myself, and I. You and I know when a child is born, listen, when they need something, they cry. It's not, listen, I know, Dad, you haven't slept for a while, or Mom, you haven't slept for a while. It's cry. Listen, I'm hungry, or I'm dirty, or whatever the case may be. I'm not comfortable in this position. Whatever it is, it's about them. And as they grow, and as they develop, and as they get mature in their age, physically and mentally, we have that responsibility, don't we? To teach them about a greater perspective than themselves. When we train and when we instruct our children in the Lord, that foolishness will be removed, and they'll start seeing the worthiness of others. In their parents first, and siblings if they have them, and then in the great commandment of Christ, in loving their neighbor as themselves. Listen, there's a reason why those who are raised properly end up being good, productive citizens no matter where they live, no matter how harsh the country or the rules or the sin or whatever it is. There's a reason why Christianity and what it teaches, what God says, brings about better. And it's because our perspective is not that of self, but of selflessness. That we know this life is not our home. We're just passing through. And that we want as many people who have not and do not know that to know the joys and the hope of eternity in Christ. And that's no different with our children. A child will never understand how to honor his father and his mother or love his neighbor as himself if we don't teach them to honor us. And so as parents, we better make sure we're doing our due diligence. And let me be clear, if we didn't do that when our kids were young, that doesn't mean we don't try to do it now. Maybe we weren't Christians when our kids were growing up. Maybe there's some who were unfaithful when their kids were growing up. Whatever the case may be, as I said, as parents, we never stop being parents. We should never stop teaching and never stop training. It would be more difficult, but it's never something we stop doing, ever, as long as our children live. And so, when we look at that, we realize there are those expectations on us. With that said, what if you had bad parents growing up or you have it now? By that I mean, what if your parents are not righteous? All of us, whether we're in this situation or not, we know someone who is. The reality is, even if this is the situation, the command to honor your father and your mother is not qualified. In other words, it doesn't say honor only if the parent is personally perceived as deserving. Honor only if the parent always reciprocates that honor back. It doesn't say honor only if it is pleasing to you, or only if you get compliments for doing it. It doesn't say honor only if it feels good or feels right, nor if other people also do it or are not doing it. No, it says honor your father and your mother. I think we see a good perspective on this from 1 Samuel chapter 24. In verses 10 and 11, when we read this, in David's encounter with King Saul, his father-in-law, who hated him very much at this point. In 1 Samuel 24, verse 10 and 11, we read, behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave. David is saying to Solomon. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. If there was anyone deserving of dishonoring someone, David had with King Saul. A man who was his father-in-law, a man whom he had comforted year after year after year, a man whom he helped win a war, and a man who turned on him and strove to kill him over and over and over. And David said, not necessarily because of your actions against me, but because you are God's. And because God tells me not to disrespect, not to dishonor. He said, I'm showing you honor. I'm wanting you to know that I will never disrespect you, Saul. I'll never dishonor you. With that said, though, honoring our parents doesn't mean following them into sin. As I said before, a parent's authority is granted by God, Ephesians 6 and verse 1, but if a parent violates that authority and asks or expects something to be done, God is the highest authority and we must follow him. The apostles found themselves in this situation when they were told, don't to speak about God or don't let us hear you talking about him. And Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than man. That as much as we will not dishonor and we will not disrespect the authority of the Jews and their leadership at that time, notice they didn't treat them badly, even though the leadership treated them badly. They said, this thing you have asked, this thing we cannot do because it's not in the Lord. This means respect for our parents should never exceed our respect for God. As Jesus said in Matthew 10:34 through 37, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus right here says there are going to be children and there are going to be parents who do not follow me, are not righteous, and therefore are not in his eyes considered good parents. And he says, when they ask you to do something that goes against him and his word, you are not to do it. And Jesus said, I know this is going to cause problems. I know there are going to be parents upset with their children and children upset with their parents if this is the case. But he said, I have to be the most important. Jesus said he has to be the one who guides us in everything, whether it be our children as parents or our parents as children. What if we have bad parents? Listen, I wish every parent was perfect here on earth, and every parent was righteous and true and only trained in righteousness and only taught the good things of God, but it's not the case. And even those that are trying are going to make mistakes and are going to give bad advice and are going to give bad instruction from time to time. When those are the case, we still honor, we still respect. We don't obey the sin that's been asked, but we do obey in righteousness. A biblical child is the one who respects, honors, and recognizes what they have, whether it's great or small, and gives due where it needs to be given. Where parent or the parents are not just relevant, but revered. In Leviticus chapter 19:32, we read this: You shall not stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, or you shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. I am Lord. As I said, age is irrelevant when it comes to the parent-child relationship. No matter how old we are, as long as our parents are alive, we are to honor and respect. And after they're gone, we certainly should not disrespect or dishonor them. And the same is true for as long as our children are here on earth. We have a responsibility to raise them, train them, and teach them in the ways of God. This morning, as you reflect upon your childhood and you being a child, and you reflect upon your children, if you have them. As you reflect upon that, I pray that you are doing that which God finds beautiful, that which God finds right, and that is honoring your father and your mother as you should. If you find a situation where that's not the case, make that change. Allow us to help you. Allow us to be a benefit to you. As I said, everyone's got different situations. Learn from those who have gone through it, or learn from those who have been around longer, but rely on this family here. Don't go through this life and through these situations on your own. Take advantage of the family God gave you here today. If you need that family this morning, please let us know. Please let us help you by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.